So of course, Stani doesn't need like a big introduction, but so he's been the founder of Avail, the Avara group of companies. Certainly, you must have heard of Lens. So he's done a bunch of stuff in the space, and so very happy to have this conversation with him today. I think we are in hot takes. We're kind of transitioning from more talks and panels to more of these one-on-one chats where we go deep into like what the founder is thinking, for example, what is he working on right now, what is he thinking about the space, where the space is going, and so on, right? Like like without further ado, right? Like I mean, maybe it would be useful for the audience in general here and those who are watching online, just to kind of hear your story in general. Like, what was your origin before Web3? After you came into Web3, like, what are all the experiences that kind of like brought you to where you are right now? I mean, some of the insight would be very helpful.
Thanks, Anurag, and glad to be here. Yeah, it's quite an interesting story actually, because I've came to this space roughly 8 years ago, and I was still studying in university, finishing my studies, and I basically started to look more into Ethereum, and I knew about Bitcoin earlier. And what was fascinating was the idea of having a programmable computer on the blockchain, and the things you can actually create in a very like a immutable way. So what was super fascinating is that kind of like I realized that you can create applications, and once you deploy these applications into on-chain, they can live there forever. And everyone can access. There's this idea of permissionless access to these dApps, and that was super fascinating for me. And I came more of like a financial angle, so I started to build financial applications and experimentations. And before the whole blockchain time, I was building different kinds of fintech applications, and the earlier in the Web 2 kind of a rush, I was building more of like social internet applications at the time when like Twitter, Reddit, and Slashdot and all these Web 2 apps started to grow. And I was a big fan of Ruby on Rails, and idea of like building modular fast applications online. So I was kind of like part that movement, and later on, I realized that a lot of use cases here on chain are very applicable to finance, because what blockchain does really well, it's a place to and a way to store value and transact with value. And first idea that came into my mind is that we've have this decentralized exchange, which was called EtherDelta, and this was 2016. A little bit later, after the DAO hack, where a lot of folks kind of like felt a little bit disappointed in the space, how we can create this huge fund of, I think, a few tens of millions, and it got hacked, and there was a lot of disappointment in the space. And I came right after that, so I kind of like didn't experience the DAO hack, but experience coming from that layer. So decentralized applications we can build. And EtherDelta was at X, and I was thinking that if you can build a permissionless exchange where you don't need to have that application to custody the funds, you can also build other financial applications. And basically being able to earn on interest and being able to use your assets as a collateral that you have on chain and borrowing against seemed like a very interesting use case to me, because that's the way to preserve capital, and you can do it in a decentralized way because of the collateral, so people don't default the loans and you can liquidate them. And that's how we started with ETHLend, short for Ethereum lending, very early dApps at that point. And then we evolved to Aave, and Aave has been growing since then. And after Aave, I've been looking into more non-financial applications and focusing quite a lot also besides Aave into Lens, which is essentially trying to solve the challenge of social capital and how do we preserve our capital that we create that isn't necessarily financial, but creates financial opportunities and creates value and should belong to the users and not a handful of corporations. So that's my angle, basically. I think I take one problem at a time and try to solve it and use these technologies that are available to us.
Okay, okay. Makes sense, makes sense. And so roughly, all these projects are under the Avara umbrella, right? What is that like? Is there a purpose to the Avara branding or umbrella? Like, what do you want the Avara brand to stand for?
So I haven't thought about branding. Like the fact that I like the idea of branding and what it can actually do and create accessibility and recognition. But I didn't really think about it that much more than until a couple of years ago. So I always had a more technocentric approach to what we're doing here. So my kind of goal has been always how to build the best technology and the best product for the users. There's a lot of things, for example, that can be better in Aave protocol. There's a lot of things that can be better in Lens. And it always takes iterations. But what really matters is how do you create the best thing for the end user and who is the end user and how we can help them more. And more recently, in a couple of years, I've been thinking more about, well, how do we make this technology more appealing as well for new audiences and existing audiences? And that's where I'm thinking more about the branding. And obviously, Aave has had a kind of a good role with the branding because we chose a cute ghost, which is a very appealing, easy to like. You can't really hate a cute-looking ghost. So we did something right organically, but then more intentionally, we started to think about, how do we want to position as more and more people come to the space, and how do we actually pull more people? And then came the idea of Avara. So Avara is essentially one kind of a big umbrella brand of combination of other brands that are solving problems in the space. Aave is solving the access of finance. Lens is solving, for example, the access of social capital. And then Family is solving the overall access into just Web3. And we've been very good at writing protocols and smart contracts. And what we're trying to do now is we're trying to be good at end-to-end. So writing good contracts, having good design, good experience, and just pushing the space towards that internet's, a comparison will be internet's personal computer moment. So how do we make all this technology very easy to use, makes sense, and cheap as well? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more today. And someone actually said to me a few days ago is that Avara kind of reminds LVMH in the sense that you have a one big brand and multiple. But I just see it in a way that, in a decentralized world, you want to have these sub-brands that people can relate to and find things why they kind of see value in it.
Awesome. Okay, so that makes sense. In general, let's turn to kind of Lens, which is the project that you've been working on. In a social context, in the world of Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and newer forms of social, right? How are you thinking about Lens? Where does Lens fit in that meta? What are we've seen the emergence of social over the year or the maturity. It began with simple feedback loops, for example, and it has matured into things like Instagram, where you need to have a following, things like TikTok, which came up with a new sort of algorithm, for example. And so there's been a lot of things, but I think one is the decentralized aspect, but there's also the open social graph thing, for example, and so on, right? So how do you think about Lens and the role of Lens about enabling developers or users, for example, in this context? This because consumers view it as like one of the options, for example, right? Like, so how does Lens fit in overall?
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges is that Lens is going after a very established big markets that have very strong network effects and pull people in. The more people go online, the more likely they choose, absolutely they choose a centralized an option, whatever that is. Same with finance as well. You most likely going to use more financial products that are centralized and not decentralized. Like it's incredibly early where we are at the moment, even though it's the 7th year of EthCC. You've been building here in the space for years, and we see constant progress. Obviously, we see waves of market cycles, but also we see a cumulative innovation that is happening. So the way I think about it is that on Lens, on a kind of like a more of a network protocol level, we want to make these tools available to the developers and the end users. And the tools don't just include being able to own your identity or your social graph, control your content and data sharing, but also the accessibility tools. So basically being able to transact without paying gas, signing transactions, having embedded wallets, account abstraction, and also very low price point for on-chain transactions, which is still kind of like a challenge. L2s essentially reduce the cost by significantly, but we still have to be a fraction of that. And once you have this tooling available and you make it relatively easy for people to build, and there's incentives to do so, and those incentives can mean different things to different people and different developers. Some incentives might be the incentive of building decentralized social, which is basically incentive for me to be here, and many other builders here in Brussels today. The another incentive is essentially some way to monetize that or sharing that monetization with the users that basically creates some sort of a network effect for more users to come, more sharing, and being able to manage that in new monetization tools. And some are just building on a shared graph, tapping into an existing pool of users, and being able to compute algorithms on an open database, an open data system. So those are the things that might basically create positive network effects, but it's actually the application layer and the experience that brings these people in. So we can go as far as inspiring developers and giving them all the tools they need to build, and then we have to see actual approaches in experience that actually makes better, exciting social networks. And we've seen so far a lot of schemomorphic approaches when it comes to social. So when you go to decentralized social applications, they usually resemble things that we already know. They feel like, let's say, Twitter. They feel like Instagram. For example, Orb, which is quite a popular application on Lens, it kind of feels like as if Instagram and Twitter will have a baby. So there is like a lot of familiarity at the moment, and I think it's a good way to onboard. But I think we need to go to a direction where we are starting to build completely new experiences, but with very familiar approach. And it comes with the waves. And once these incentives are there, and someone builds something really interesting, that basically breaks through more users into the space. And if the blockchain is abstracted away with all this experience tooling, that also means that the users, they don't need to really think about the blockchain part. It feels like you're using any kind of web application at that point.
Are you thinking of this as a set of apps or as a platform with extensibility in mind in general? Like, what building blocks are you kind of looking to give to developers?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the approach, because I do think that the social aspect that are primitives that create social capital is important to share. I think at this point, the way we've done on Lens protocol is that it's a kind of like a system that we give for the developers to build on. And it's a combination of like identities, social graphs, and content linking on chain, and the content usually is stored off chain across Lens applications. Now with the Lens network and a new iteration of Lens protocol that we're building, we're actually thinking more of like, well, what if actual developers can just choose what's important for them? So they might use usernames for their own application. They might use a graph. Maybe they don't need either or. Maybe just they need the content piece to create a blog, and then maybe the comment piece to make comments. And maybe there's some additional monetization tools they want to use. So the way we think about these primitives is that we try to build them as extensible and very kind of like a core. So we build the core, and then we put a little opinionated layer on top, which is basically how we interpret these primitives. And then everyone else can use it the way we think is the best way to use, or they can deviate from that and build something new. So there's going to be like a really radical change how we are now onboarding developers into building Lens, and also how we think about ourselves about these primitives, and also extending. And there's a lot of interesting new things there that we're thinking about just the network design. Like we want to see more of heterogeneous networks, which means that we don't want to see one application driving all the traction and being the main app, and everyone else builds around that application, because usually what happens is that the users are fed directly to the kind of like a best use case of that category. And what we want to see actually is that the applications can create nodes like from the content, and users actually have more control over their data. So in the future, when you sign up for Lens and you use an application, you decide what you want to share with that application. And then these applications, they need actually, they need to be organically trying to get users to share the content, or they can incentivize that as well. And that creates a really diverse set of networks, and also breeds culture, but also create these applications a mode. And you don't have the feeling that when you go from one Lens application to another, you have the same followers. You can actually have different set of followers in a music application with your friends, and different kind of follower base in your, let's say, crypto networking application.
And how are you thinking about user acquisition? Because every emerging new social networking app or platform has this. I mean, any marketplace has this, but in general, are you looking to create this or attract this whole new user base, or will you also be looking to piggyback on existing social media graphs, for example? How are you thinking about that aspect?
I think Lens has progressed so far that it has quite a crypto-centric audience. And the audience is, there's, for example, developers, there's creators, enthusiasts in the space, and all kinds of users. And I think that's great. I think that's a really great opportunity that we have a sticky community that is there, and we can build the infrastructure and provide more tooling for developers, and also grow the whole user base. And the interesting thing about Lens is that, you know, once a user onboards, they have the profile obviously forever. And, you know, every single application that is launched on Lens, that has a compounding effect on the user base. So you don't really, you're kind of like sharing the user base when you're building on Lens, which is a good thing, because you can tap into existing user base and you can contribute to grow it. And then also as a developer or a user, you can also participate in the governance through these Lens improvement proposals, LIPs. And that means that you know, you can actually decide and have a voice what direction the protocol goes towards. It's a very typical functionality of a decentralized protocol. And what I think about is going to be now interesting and really possible is just to go after new user bases. And that's because we have a lot of this tooling. So essentially the way we build Lens Network is that obviously we have a Validium, which means that we are submitting state transitions into Ethereum. So we're getting the Ethereum security, but then we use data availability for actually then storing the state. And what that means is that we can actually go a significant lower on the cost for on-chain transactions, those transactions that need on-chain, obviously, than, for example, rollups are having. And then we can target more consumers. And when the cost is relatively much more lower than the existing L2s, at that point, the developers even start to think about the infrastructure as any developer today thinks about, let's say, AWS. They just pay for as you go, or they pay, let's say, $50 a month, and they have enough actually credits for all their users on their application in securing by using on-chain system. And I think those tools combined with user experience, you have nothing really blocking you from this point to actually going after new user bases and consumers. And I think this is a new thing. This really happened on the past year with focus on embedded wallet, account abstractions, and also keeps happening with, for example, with Validium and other, and data availability, obviously, and other tooling. And I think that's why we're going to see a lot of consumer apps, social or non-social, in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you already mentioned about, so I was getting into that. So you recently announced that you would be, like you're transitioning to a more Validium-based architecture, which you briefly touched on. Just any indication on why you chose, like a ZK rollup and specifically ZK Sync? Any thoughts?
Yeah, and I've been following optimistic rollups since the beginning. Avail has been one of the first protocols being deployed actually on many of the optimistic rollups, and I'm a big fan of the development there, and there's some progress as well with the fraud proofs, which I'm quite happy about. But what changed my kind of perception is that a lot of the ZK technology came into maturity relatively recently. For the past 2 years, we've seen ZK VMs coming online. We actually see an infrastructure to build in a most EVM compatible way by using ZK proofs. And I think that has been like a really groundbreaking moment, and a lot of teams are working on the topic at the moment. Some of these ZK VMs, they're not 100% EVM compatible, but they can do most of the things that really is needed on chain. And what's fascinating here is that down the line with ZK-based technology, the proofs and compressions become just more optimized and more compressed, which means that you can have better pricing on transactions and more bandwidth and more security from that perspective. And I do think that eventually the space is going towards this type of a technology where we move into a ZK-based L2s, and it will happen for, I think, for optimistic rollups as well. So that's one of the main components there, and specifically with ZK Sync team, they were able to deliver a Validium setup for a ZK-based rollup, which Validium is technically a rollup in terms of terminology, but that means that we can actually go to an extremely low price point. And being able to have this modularity and just choose what parts you want to use for the blockchain in terms of execution, the storage component, you can actually start opening up the idea of like how much security you need to use for your application or the protocol. And this is like a really unbelievably groundbreaking, because the way we always used Ethereum is that we basically priced all the transactions in the same way, regardless how much security they need. So when you deploy into Ethereum, and then with L2s, you basically kind of like have cost reduction of that. But now you can actually choose the level of security. And I think that's fundamentally going to be important for consumer apps because social transactions, they need on-chain for establishing identity in a graph, as an example, and also content linking in some of the use cases. But they don't need the same security as example, financial transactions such as like depositing into Aave or supplying stable coins somewhere. I do think that Validiums are really great also for payments, actually. So if you want to, let's say, scroll your Lens feed, and every scroll essentially charges you a few cents, that's a really exciting use case that you can use Validium for DeFi.
Okay, I think we are almost at time. I'll just ask last few questions. In general, I'll move away from tech-specific questions to ask a more, like trend-based question. The world in general has been moving to this more gig economy style place, right? Like, I mean, in general, what is happening is less and less people are having salaried jobs, for example. More people are opting to become, let's say, creators, influencers, and like gig workers, for example, and so on. And so that the world is changing, the nature of work is changing. There's been a lot of automation coming from, like, let's say, AI, the promise of AI, for example. So that whole world is changing, and social networking platforms have not either are too big or are too slow to move. And they've not been kind of reflecting this reality in their apps. Like, just for an example, creators, for example, when they monetize off the social network, right? Most of the monetization is off chain. Like, like they are paid by the brand, for example, or something like that. What are some of these newer use cases that you are focusing on to bring that part of the economy which is not served by existing paradigms, social network platforms, for example, but that you are seeing early success with?
Yeah, I think that's a really fundamental challenge with the existing, like, also internet. So typical example is that if you go to a news site, and you want to read one article, right? You just have one article that you're really interested to read, and you go and scroll, once, and you get a paywall, and that paywall says to you that, pay, I don't know, $8 a month for 12 months, and you can read this article, and you can read this whole, the whole website, all these like pieces that are paywalled. And that's the monetization model of the internet for many of things regarding information. And that's really sad because obviously the way we established the existing internet is that, we created the payment rails. It's a credit card based. There's not much flexibility. It's kind of like a light switch, what you can do. But if you rethink the whole idea of monetization and how brands and people and distribution could get paid, there could be way many other options. Just as an example is that if you scroll your Lens feed, a payment can be triggered, or a news site, or based on you reading letters or paragraphs that can initiate a payment, or any type of angle of the design space. So that's one thing. And regarding like social, it has the exact same problem. And what you mentioned, that you're stuck really on, selling things and trying to monetize off chain and with referral codes, and which is very untransparent. You don't even know if that's if you have an influencer or person you followed promoted something for the sake of that being something that they really endorse, or they are getting paid for that. And it's a problem in some type of product categories specifically. And the more transparency you can have, which on-chain actually does it really well, it brings transparency on the monetization aspect and actually how people are charging, earning, and maybe that can actually inspire that, it's okay to monetize as long as people know what's happening there and it happens transparently. The biggest reason this can't really happen on existing social networks is that most of the monetization is going from advertisers to the platform, and only like a tiny fraction is going to the actual users, and that's like devastating to see in a transparent format. Think about like Block Explorer. So I think this is the thing, that if we own these primitives ourselves, identities, graphs, networks, and it's an open system, shared network, anyone can build on top of these networks. The users can actually choose how to monetize and share that monetization with other users or the applications. And this is already happening on Lens. You see things like splits as an example, where users collect NFTs, content of NFTs, and they are sharing that revenue with other users, with the applications, and I think even future with algorithms for the discovery. So the kind of like interesting innovation is the ability with on-chain to share the revenue across all the participants and making it more transparent. And probably we'll see more things that, how you can monetize more of that attention and getting monetization more on-chain and bringing that transparency.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for so much for the very insightful answers. It was wonderful having you, Stani, here. If you want to add any closing thoughts, otherwise we'll end this discussion for now.
Yeah, maybe one last point is that obviously, like I've been coming here for a few years now, and I think that one of the main things about the whole idea of decentralization is, bringing essentially more user choice, more power to the people. And I think one of the main things I want to leave you all is that decentralization is something that we have to fight for. So it's not something that really going to exist if we just keep evolving and we don't have opinions. So it's really important to become governors of the space and participate in these different protocols and technology that we build. And it's a very unique thing, because open source is not a new thing. Most of the software in the world, most of the computers, almost all, are running on open source. But now you have a chance to actually contribute and participate. So decentralization is something that is very value and ethos based, and it's something that we always have to fight for, whether it's social or DeFi or something else. And that's why we need kind of like active participation in the space. And besides that, I'm happy to being able to come here, and want to thank you, Anurag, for hosting this nice event, and also thank you everyone for coming here as well.